I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. This week, I think we are going to talk about the death of David Koch and a little bit about the political divide that seems to be opening up in the United States. First, for those of you who don't know, David Koch died this past week, 79 years old. For those who don't know who the Koch brothers are, I feel we'll give a little bit of history. The Koch brothers are brothers, obviously, who have been very heavily involved in politics for a long time, but basically in the past 10 to 15 years have really come to prominence as sort of the people in political finance. They are libertarians, not Republicans. They're libertarians, and they have funded hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research and think tanks, conservative candidates, all these different people and things over the past, well, I guess really since the 80s. But as I said, the real push in politics has come in the last 15 years. And they're treated as sort of boogeymen by people on the left side of the aisle because they happen to be funding conservatives and right-wing candidates. But they are libertarians in nature. They become the center of a controversy around money in politics because they are tied for the 11th richest person in the world, have billions and billions of dollars with which to play. And because they have all this money, they have been able to spend a lot of money in politics. So it's become sort of a thing where if you're running for Republican politics, you want to get in good with the Koch brothers because they might be able to fund your entire campaign. They have a donor network and a lot of organizations that they funded or founded that can basically help anyone increase their chance of getting elected greatly. So that's who David Koch is. He's just a man who made a lot of money and used that money to get into politics. If that was the description that was used of him, I don't see the controversy. The thing is, he just happened to be an incredibly wealthy man, and the amount of money that he poured into politics made people uncomfortable. They think that because somebody has a lot of money, that they shouldn't be able to influence politics to the extent that he was. Now, I'm all for talking about campaign finance laws and things along that nature. I think that some transparency laws are good. Some caps on the things that people and corporations can spend on politics are probably good. I don't know. I really don't know the answer when it comes to the idea that money is free speech. I tend to agree to an extent. However, I will acknowledge that there is a limit where, Jeff Bezos has $130 billion to play with and I have $10 to play with. Then why should his free speech be worth more than my free speech? Because at that point, we're not fighting a war of ideas. We're fighting a financial war. If we both are on opposite sides of an issue and I'm the only one supporting my issue, he's the only one supporting his issue, he will win if it goes to a ballot because he probably would be able to propagandize more than me with his money. So I understand why some people look at people like the Koch brothers and say, oh, this man put what amounted to $1 billion into politics and he funded things I don't like and he's a bad person for it. I understand the first part, being uncomfortable because a guy is able to put that much money in when you can't. But the second part is the issue that I have. The second part that says I don't agree with him and he's a bad person. That is really gross. And I actually pulled up a couple things here from Twitter, which, as I always say, Twitter is the worst. You can find the worst of humanity on Twitter. I don't know why people... I understand why the platform is appealing. You get interaction with people whom you would otherwise have no interaction with. Celebrities, thinkers, writers, whatever the case may be. Whoever it is, politicians, people you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to interact with one-on-one. But Twitter is terrible. And it's because people lose their humanity on Twitter. So I pulled up a couple tweets that just demonstrate this point, that a man died, and he wasn't an evil person by any stretch of the imagination. He was a conservative. He would have described himself as a libertarian. He was a libertarian. I'm a libertarian. He funded a lot of conservative think tanks, a lot of conservative politicians, and a lot of... I think the biggest criticism I've seen for him is that he was in the oil business, and he funded a lot of research that was skeptical about climate change. He's not... I don't know if he necessarily was a climate change denier, but he did fund a lot of research into, I guess, climate denial science, if that might be the way to put it, which is the biggest knock I think that people would have against him. But anyway, so this guy who happened to be a libertarian and believe in things that a lot of conservatives believe in, he died, and these are the kind of things that people were saying about him. Today, and his brother's name is Charles. For those who don't know, is David and Charles are the two Koch brothers that everyone is always referring to. There are other brothers; they have other brothers, but Charles and David are the two that people are referring to by the Koch brothers. So here are some of the tweets. Today, Charles Koch is learning how overjoyed the world will be when he dies. I feel sorry for Charles Koch. His brother's passing must be difficult. I pray they are soon reunited. Wishing for the death of Charles Koch right there. I wonder how I'll be remembered when I'm gone. After today, I feel better knowing at least I could never be as hated as David Koch. All right. I mean, and the list of things that people were saying online just goes on and on and on. They're terrible. They're mean. They're hateful. Now, why is that? Why do people think it's appropriate to be mean and hateful about a man? He's not a mass murderer. This isn't a guy who committed genocide. This is a guy who funded conservative politicians. And people are treating him like it's the death of Saddam Hussein, and they're trying to tear down his statue. And I don't understand it. It is really gross. It's really gross to celebrate the death almost of anyone, even terrible people. Even if David Koch was the worst person who ever lived, it's really hard to celebrate the death of a person. That requires a little bit of a loss of humanity. Now, Jeffrey Epstein died last week. People were putting up all sorts of quotes. I'm not going to have an episode about it. We're not going to talk about how it's terrible that people celebrate the death of Jeffrey Epstein. If there's ever an appropriate person to celebrate the death about, it's someone like that. Not David Koch. Not a guy who, again, his big sin in life is having money and using that money to get involved in politics. That's it. Some people would argue again the climate change stuff. He is a big funder of anti-climate change science, which, again, I don't support. I am not a climate change denier. However, that doesn't make him Hitler. That doesn't make him Stalin. He's not a terrible person because he doesn't agree with you. And if you think it's okay to celebrate the death of someone who doesn't agree with you, I think there's something wrong. And so these tweets went on and on and on. People celebrating his death. Bill Maher on his show. I normally love Bill Maher. We don't agree on everything. However, I like the fact that he slaps both sides when he thinks they're doing wrong. And sometimes he nails it, and other times I'm like, ooh, you missed that one. And this week he did. He missed one. He did an entire extended bit on his show about, he's glad David Koch's dead and he's a terrible person and all these different things. And I just was thinking to myself, it's just not okay that people think it's nobody seems to care that you're calling out this, or no one's calling out, I guess, these people on their own side who are saying these terrible things. If obviously this is years and years away, but again, if Barack Obama died, and I use him as an example because he has a certain sort of, people love him on the left side of the aisle, which there's a lot to love there. He's probably the most well-liked Democratic politician that there is. I don't know if I could think of another one besides him who's as well respected in his own circle, at least. But if he died and people on the right were celebrating his death because they hated Obamacare, right? Like they hated the idea of government intrusion into healthcare. They disagreed with him on all these different things, and people were celebrating him. People would rightly call him out and say, "This is inappropriate. This is not okay. It's terrible that you're saying these things about a former president." And I would agree with them. I would absolutely 100% agree with them. But this is the same thing, only reversed. It's a Republican, not politician, but a Republican donor, a big name in Republican politics, and he dies, and people just think it's appropriate to, again, say terrible things when it's not appropriate. It's just not okay to ever celebrate the death of somebody, and especially just because you disagree with them. There's something really gross about that. So I wanted to read off a couple things here that really demonstrate why taking someone's political beliefs and then using that to say you're a bad person because I disagree with you is a ridiculous statement. So let me just read a couple things here. So David Koch, he was big. He helped fund the anti-tax small government group Americans for Prosperity. This was back in 2004. Now he's big in the Tea Party movement, which he then eventually distanced himself from because he didn't recognize what it became. But he was big in the Tea Party movement, which in principle just was for lower taxes and smaller government. It's a pretty libertarian idea. So those are things that people, again, take swings at him for. But let's talk about this other stuff he did. He donated $100 million in 2007 to create a cancer research institute at MIT. Gave millions of dollars to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, the MD Anderson Cancer in Houston, and other institutes. $65 million to support a renovation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Lincoln Center Theater that houses the New York Ballet became the David H. Koch Theater in 2008 when he gave them $100 million. Parts of the Smithsonian National Museum and Natural History Museum are named after him after he contributed $50 million to exhibits there that were dinosaur fossils and human evolution. He was given an award by the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers because he funded legal representation for people who couldn't afford it. He was given the Defender of Justice Award. This is a guy, again, he's a libertarian. He's not even a Republican. He was for criminal justice reform. He's for amnesty for illegal immigrants. These things that are, he was anti-Donald Trump. And this guy didn't even support Donald Trump, didn't give him his nomination, didn't help him. Donald Trump has taken a couple slaps at him because he did not support him, would not do it. So this guy, again, not even holding Republican beliefs. Everyone on the left tends to think people who are Republican are evil. This guy wasn't even a Republican. He, again, amnesty, criminal justice reform. He's very soft on immigration. He despised Donald Trump, wouldn't support him. Instead, contributed money to people running for Senate and in Congress in 2016. Did not give money to the presidential campaign whatsoever. So this guy, who was just one of the biggest philanthropists in the world, hundreds of millions of dollars to cancer research, to fund the arts, to do all these different things, and he's painted as the worst person in the world because he happened to have some beliefs outside of the left mainstream. Again, the biggest one that you'll see people knocking for is the climate change stuff. Just, he's the worst person in the world because he was in the oil business and tried to fund that business and protect that business by funding anti-climate science research. Now, if you're of the opinion that we have, like AOC said, we have about 12 years to get our act together before the world's doomed. Well, okay. First of all, that's not true. But secondly, you don't then just get to use that as an excuse to be a bad person. Right? If somebody disagrees with you, somebody doesn't believe in climate change, you don't then get to club them. You don't then get to hit them and say, well, you don't believe in climate change. You're killing the planet. Therefore, you're the worst person in the world because you basically went in the ocean and strangled a sea turtle. Like, that's what that guy did. He denied climate science. He basically he swam in the ocean. He dove down deep. He pulled up a blue whale and he killed it on the beach. That was David. He did that himself. He did that with his two hands and a flipper. He put a flipper on his feet and he went and killed that blue whale. That's how people treat this guy. They treat him like he single-handedly is going into the ocean and pulling animals out and murdering them. He's clubbing the baby seals. That's David Koch. He's out there. That's what they're acting like they have video of him doing these things, and they were watching it right before they sent that tweet. Like, I just watched David Koch club a baby seal. What a terrible person. No, the guy didn't do anything terrible in his life. At least not that I'm aware of. Right? He could have done something terrible I'm just unaware of. But the public persona of David Koch is not a terrible person. The guy had money. He used it to get into politics, fund things he believed in. Why is that a wrong thing? Oh, it's because they're the things that you don't believe in. So because you don't agree with him, that makes him a terrible person. That is not a good way to live your life. People disagree with me all the time. It is important for me that I try not to use the disagreement as an excuse to then be mean to other people, to be rude. I try not to do these things because people disagreeing with you is a good thing. It's a good thing to be able to disagree with someone and have a discussion, have a conversation with them. It's not okay to disagree with someone and then go to the ad hominem attacks. You can't just attack a person's character because you happen to be on one side and they happen to be on the other side of an issue. It's not okay. Now, this trend of attacking people for beliefs that we don't share is not new to politics, but it is probably the worst I've ever seen it. Recently, I don't know if anyone remembers, a couple weeks ago, a month ago, perhaps at this point, Joaquin Castro, the brother of Julian Castro, who's running for president, he put out a list of people who had maxed out, people and businesses in his district, which had maxed out to Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Now, there's a big problem on the internet recently. People are talking about doxing, where you release someone's private information online, which puts them at both a security risk and a harassment risk. It's a bad thing to do to people. And there's a good argument to be made that doxing is not necessarily a form of free speech that should be protected. And again, this is coming from a free speech purist. But doxing has a lot of security implications. Like, doxing someone is almost a form of intimidation or threat at certain points. So it's a complicated one. But anyway, the list of people who donate to political campaigns is public. It's public information. However, Joaquin Castro released this graphic, which is like, oh, it's a shame that all these people in these districts maxed out to Donald Trump. Be on the lookout for him. Is basically what it came down to. And he released a list of all the people who had done it and their names and everything. And everyone immediately jumped to defend him, say this information is publicly available. He didn't dox anyone. And it's like, well, you don't understand well, what was the purpose of him releasing that list? The purpose was to shame his political opponents. And what do you think is going to happen when you release this list and you say it's a shame that all these people think it's appropriate to donate to Donald Trump? It basically set them up for targeted harassment. You're going to shame people in your community for donating to the President of the United States. This basically shows the problem here in a nutshell. It's the fact that people now look at the other side as the other and not just the other side. And there's a little bit of a difference there. The other side of an argument is good. It's good to know. It's good to have. It's good to have two sides that balance each other out. But what we don't want to start doing is viewing the other side as others. People who aren't like us. People who we need to fight and we need to destroy to win. Because that is not how you live in a civil society. That is the recipe for a dystopian future. That one where we cannot live together, where we're going to wind up living in parallel countries that just happen to be next to each other. And I really am afraid of this happening. I'm really afraid that this is the path that we're on, because you look at things like this, where this seems like a small instance, right? Joaquin Castro released a list of people who donated to President Trump. But that idea that it's appropriate to target people for differing political beliefs. And that's what this was. This was targeting people for different beliefs, for harassment online. This was about intimidating them or publicly shaming them. That's what this was. And it's small, but it's important. Because that idea that other people who disagree with you, they're not people who disagree with you. They're not your fellow countrymen. They're evil people who need to be destroyed. That idea is becoming pervasive in this society. And it is incredibly troubling to watch. Because again, there are people who I disagree with substantially. And there have been a couple people who've been trying really hard to make a distinction. And so I'm going to try and make that distinction as well. There are a lot of people I disagree with. I would, for the longest time, I was a Democrat. I would have called myself liberal. And then I switched. I tried to call myself a classical liberal, which basically is all the things that a liberal should be. Classical liberal. Believe in freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I believe in individual freedom and sovereignty. All these different things. All these classical liberal beliefs, right? These things that helped make Western civilization, and specifically the United States, amazing. And I called myself that for a long time. And then I eventually embraced the term libertarian only because I felt as though the two parties didn't do an adequate job of representing me. And I like the idea of libertarianism just because I wish there was a third party that made sense. Unfortunately, the Libertarian Party is a big mess. So it is what it is. But the point being, there are people who I disagree with who happen to be on the left side of the aisle. And these people are called liberals. And liberals are amazing because liberals and I might disagree on something like tax policy or immigration, how we should handle it, the problem with public schools. We might disagree on things like that, but they'll listen to an argument. They'll argue their side. We'll go back and forth. They won't try and shut down speech, or they won't try and silence people, deplatform them. They won't do these different things. They won't name and shame. They don't think their people who disagree with them are evil. And the problem is that on the left, you have liberals, which I think make up the majority of people on the left. But then you have other people, and you have leftists. Now, this is an important distinction. Liberals, I love liberals. Love Democrats and people on the left side of the aisle who could be described as liberal. They're amazing people. A lot of my people in my family, mostly, are liberals. They're amazing people. And then you have people who are leftists. And leftists are people I disagree with so adamantly because they don't understand the foundation of the country. They don't understand that freedom of speech, it does not, it comes before your freedom of being offended. So if someone disagrees with the leftists, they don't want to listen to an argument. They want to yell and shout. They want to shut down speakers. These people are dangerous. They don't believe in the values that safeguard our country, which, again, come back to the founding documents and the rights that we're all given. And these are the kind of people who think that doxing President Trump supporters is appropriate and okay, and will defend people like Joaquin Castro and write an op-ed in the New York Times that says Joaquin Castro didn't dox anybody. That's what these people will do. And it's incredibly, incredibly gross. Just the idea that it's appropriate to take someone on the other side of the aisle and use your platform, which is relatively large, your brother's running for president, use your relatively large platform to name and shame someone because they disagree with you and target that person for online harassment. That's exactly what he did, and then the New York Times had an op-ed defending it. It's not okay. It really isn't. It's something about it. And so, in reality, and there are people on the right who do this too, by the way. I don't want to act like I'm just picking on the left side of the aisle. There are people on the right who have troubling views about free speech as well. Those tend to come from the ultra conservative religious sect. Used to be the big problem. They're not as much anymore. And now it's your far right white nationalist morons who, again, they have troubling views all on their own about a whole bunch of different things. The point is, though, that this problem of disagreement and viewing your political opponents as not opponents but actual enemies who you treat as though they're trying to destroy the country. That's the important part, actually. Now that we're talking about it, the important part is that for the overwhelming majority of people, if I disagree with you, if I disagree with a liberal, for example, I understand and I will give them the benefit of the doubt that when we're arguing about taxes and I say we should lower it, or I've gone so far as to say anymore that what we should do is probably abolish our current tax system because it is ridiculous. There's not a single person in the government who's read the tax code. 6.5 feet tall when stacked in sheets of paper. 6.5 feet tall. No one's even read it. What we should do is abolish it, get rid of it, take the whole thing, run it through a shredder. And then what we should probably do is implement a flat tax. Save us what amounts to billions of dollars in processing everything, and it would just be easier for everyone. You say, oh, we all owe 18% at the end of the year. Everyone. Okay, that's easy. Let's do it. But that's a whole different thing. But if I disagree with someone about that, and then we go back and forth. They say, no, we need a progressive tax system. Here are the reasons. We go back and forth. I have always, or will always, try and give that person the benefit of the doubt. Say, okay, well, we have a disagreement, but we both want what's best for the country. And I feel like most people are able to do that. But there is a growing number of people who are unable to do that. They look at a disagreement and they say, well, this person's a terrible person. He supports all these corrupt institutions, and he's a bad person because he disagrees with me. And if he was a good person, he'd realize that a progressive tax system is the only fair one to those economically disadvantaged, and he hates the poor, and and they go on and on and on. And this is growing, this segment of the population. It is growing at an alarming rate. And it's growing so much that if I came out tomorrow, and a part of this is due to the fact that Donald Trump is a particularly polarizing figure in American politics. People hate him with a passion that seems a little crazy at times. I've seen people refer to it as Trump derangement syndrome. I think that's kind of a funny name. However, it's not entirely inappropriate because some people just are deranged. They are driven mad by President Trump, and you probably should just calm down a little bit. But he's a particularly polarizing figure, and so it's hard. But if I came out tomorrow and I said, I love Donald Trump, and I'm going to support him, and this and that, and I wore my MAGA hat around, people would think it's appropriate to harass me in the streets. They would think it's appropriate to knock the hat off my head and throw milkshakes at people. And again, this segment of the population that thinks that it's appropriate to actually hate someone who disagrees with you politically is growing larger and larger every day, and that is not the way that you have a functioning republic. You can't have a functioning republic when the two sides no longer engage in discourse, but instead they think it's appropriate to fight each other. And they don't talk about ideas, they talk about how to destroy the other side. You know, if I win an election and I am in charge, I don't govern people who agree with me. I govern everyone. And that's the way politics is supposed to work. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. I didn't vote for him. I'm probably not going to vote for him in 2020. But he's the president of the United States. And if people want to support him, then feel free. I can disagree with you about why you might do that. But it doesn't mean that everyone who voted for Donald Trump's a terrible person. We should name and shame them, boycott their businesses, and never let them have a moment's rest. That's a terrible way to think about people who voted for Donald Trump. That's a terrible way to treat fellow citizens and people who disagree with you in general. It's not okay to be that way. And I worry that we're falling into a pattern where it's easy to be tribal. It's easy to look at your side and say, these are my people, and everyone outside of this group, wherever you draw that circle, right? Every side outside of this group, I don't care about those people. The problem is that the circle that you should draw is around the United States. And it's not that we don't care about the rest of the world, but you got to protect the country that you live in and the values, because this happens to be, congratulations everyone, by the way. You happen to have been born in the greatest country in the history of the world at the best time ever to be alive. So if your life is so terrible, then, oh man, I would have hated to have seen you at any other point in history, because right now is the greatest time to be alive ever. Doesn't matter really where you're born in the world. It's the best time ever to be here on the planet. And if you happen to have been born in the United States, or you happen to live in the United States, congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. It's the best place ever in the history of the world to be. Now, the circle we're drawing is around that, is protecting that, and what made America great in the first place. That is our priority. That should be what we're doing. And realizing that everyone here deserves a voice. Everyone here has the ability and the right to disagree with you, and it doesn't make them evil. There are very few beliefs that someone could espouse that would make me think they're an evil person. You know, when you're on the very far right, and you believe, and here's something that's very important. It is the idea that, yes, people who disagree with me, liberals who disagree with me on, for example, the tax rate, which is always an easy one to use as an example. Not bad people. They disagree with me. I disagree with them. That's fine. But there are actual people in the country who are our enemies. And these are the people who want to tear down our country, tear down all the institutions, raise the, burn the crops, salt the fields. These are people who think that the United States is a terrible, evil place, and that everything needs to be destroyed so that we can rebuild. Those people are actually my intellectual enemies. People like Antifa, or on the far right, anyone like Richard Spencer, or these white ethno-nationalist assholes. Those people on the far right and Antifa on the far left. These people, these fringe groups, those people are people that I don't mind if you think they're terrible. I don't care, because they are. But again, try to make important distinctions when talking about people, because what we don't want to do is conflate people like David Koch, a man who donates hundreds of millions of dollars to charity, hundreds of millions of dollars to cancer charity and arts, who maybe, and again, this is a maybe, but hundreds of millions of dollars to cancer research. How many people did David Koch save with that? How many lives did he save? How many lives have you saved before you start castigating David Koch as a terrible human being because he disagrees with you? Again, so before we start conflating people like him with Richard Spencer, who is a terrible person, then let's just be careful. Let's make distinctions. Let's use some nuance. And let's talk about people the way they deserve to be talked about. It's okay to not like David Koch. It's okay to not like him. It's right. You have my permission to not like David Koch. What you don't have is my permission to celebrate his death like it's a good thing, or to treat your political opponents as if they're terrible human beings. When John McCain died, you notice that people seem to forget that they didn't like John McCain. When he ran for president, it was against Barack Obama. Everyone on the left treated John McCain like he was a terrible person. And when he died, people seem to forget that because he was anti-Trump, because he and Trump fought. And we should all treat people like that before they die, right? Like, we should treat people we disagree with like we treated John McCain after he died, which is that guy sacrificed a lot of his life to protect this country. And I disagreed with him on a lot of things, but he was a good person who I happen to disagree with. And that's how we should treat everyone, is try and treat people like they're good people. Don't impugn their motives when they disagree with you. Don't think that because someone disagrees with you, it's because they're a terrible, no good, awful human being. And just be nice. Just be nice. That's actually what it comes down to. Just try and be nice. I don't always succeed. I fail a lot. But we should try. We should try and be nice. Be nice to the memory of David Koch. Don't be like Bill Maher was this week and celebrate his death and say he's glad he's fucking dead. That's terrible. That's a terrible thing to say. I don't know. Overall, the trend is worrisome. That's all it is. So I guess really, in reality, that's how we're going to leave it this week. We're going to leave it off with be nice. It's great advice. I think I just invented it. We're going to start doing... I didn't have any good questions this week to address, so we're going to skip a little Q&A this week. Instead, I also decided that I'm going to end each week with a book recommendation. So this week, in honor of David Koch, we're going to recommend a good libertarian book called Anthem by Ayn Rand. Just read it this past week. Been trying to read a book every week for the past couple years. This week, Anthem by Ayn Rand. It's a good... Ayn Rand is one of the big thinkers in libertarian circles. For those of you who don't know, Anthem is good. It's only about 100 and something pages, 110 pages or so. So it's a quick, easy one read. It's great about... It really paints with a heavy hand in this book. There's very little subtlety. It's very much a book about individual liberty and thought. So that's my book recommendation for the week. I think that's about it for this episode of the Chrestman Conversation. Again, anyone who has questions, comments, concerns, please email me, tcchrestman@gmail.com. It's going to be down in the description below. And I think after this episode, we'll be up on Apple Podcasts. So I'm going to send that out to people so you can download it. Because I know the YouTube video of me sitting here looking handsome isn't for everyone. I know some people like the audio version only. So we'll be up this week, I believe. I think that's it for the Chrestman Conversation this week. You guys, take it easy.